Good morning from San Francisco and good afternoon, good evening to Austria. My name is Daniel Sawaczynski. I'm the Austrian Trade Commissioner here in San Francisco and the co-director of Open Austria. Welcome to our third GoUSA Startup Talk, third month of the year, third episode. So we are very proud that we have amazing speakers that are joining us on our journey this year and showing all of you, the Austrian entrepreneurs, different aspects of being a founder and an entrepreneur in the US. In our first episode, we looked at the state of venture capital, which trends are currently occurring in the US, what does it mean to have a downturn market, and still how you as an entrepreneur can benefit, especially as an early stage startup. In our last episode, actually just a week ago, we looked at how it is to set up shop in the US and what aspects have to be considered, starting from the legal aspect, the tax aspect, the hiring aspects. We really covered a wide area of topics within that webinar. And today we are discussing yet another incredibly important aspect, because knowing how to do business in the US is one thing, but knowing how to actually come into the country in the right way is a completely different thing. So we are extremely excited to have an extraordinary speaker with us, Sophie Alcorn. Sophie, thank you so much for taking the time. Sophie is the founder and founding partner of Alcorn Immigration Law, the top leading immigration law firm in San Francisco and California. So it's an absolute pleasure having you with us. And I would just say, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share my knowledge and information with founders from Austria and their co-founders from around the world with Austrian companies for whom it can make a difference. So thank you so much. All right, so we're talking about geography and where you are physically in the world. And Paul Graham, so if you're a founder and you like reading history about history of startups and essays on how startups work, you've probably heard of Paul Graham. He's the founder of Y Combinator. He is a great essayist. And this is something he wrote in 2007. Startups thrive in startup hubs like Silicon Valley. Startups are a very specialized business, as specialized as diamond cutting. And in startup hubs, they understand it. So there are a lot of reasons to participate in the Advantage Austria Startup Program in San Francisco and other locations across the United States. These are startup hubs, and they can help you with obviously resources and funding and access to the US market. And when you have product market fit and you're ready to scale, you'll need sophisticated, experienced project managers that know how to scale. And so even in 2023, post-COVID, the world changed a lot. We have a lot of remote or decentralized or hybrid teams in startups, but I would suggest there is still an advantage to geography. And if you want to have a thriving startup, it's really important to consider this. And if you're at the very beginning of your startup journey, then you have the advantage because you're already taking these important considerations into account in your planning. So today's talk is a talk for founders who want to scope out the US market and explore options for visas and green cards while raising funding. So we'll be talking about how to visit the United States, to participate in an accelerator program or incubator program or Advantage Austria and come here and be in the batch and scope out the market and the geography. We'll talk about if you know that you or a team member wants to move to the United States to grow your business here, how to do that, both in the short term with a work visa and also in the long term with a green card. And so there's a lot of myths and people can freak themselves out about US immigration. So just some consoling factors. It really doesn't matter whether you are pre or post education. We get visas and green cards for people who dropped out of college or who never went to college or who are too young to go to college. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have a minimum viable product or not yet. That is not a consideration for any US immigration process. It's not a legal requirement, and they don't ask and they don't care. It doesn't matter whether you have raised funding or not. If you are pre-raised, or like a very early friends and family round, or pre-seed, we've certainly helped founders and teams get immigration paperwork done at those very earliest stages of a company. Or we've helped people who have raised $15 million Series A's come here, and beyond. So the amount of funding you've gotten doesn't matter. Once again, like an MVP, government doesn't care if you have product market fit or not. It's not a legal requirement for anything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have a unicorn valuation. It doesn't matter if you IPO'd. It doesn't matter if you got a Nobel Prize. So all of this stuff that there's a lot of mythology about US immigration, or also just like the standard growth trajectory of a hockey stick startup. The immigration laws and framework of the United States are very separate. So although as founders, we can get hung up on like, oh my God, like, is my MVP working? And how are we going to get to product market fit? You can run your immigration process independent of and parallel to the growth of your product. And we'll talk about what requirements you need to meet to be able to qualify for US visas and green cards that are completely independent of these milestones of startup growth. But really, so this talk today is for anybody with US hopes and dreams. So, sometimes my clients are like, yeah, I love my life in Europe, but we'll go there, we'll make a lot of money, and then we'll come back. And other people are like, oh, I've wanted to live in Silicon Valley since I was a kid. I want to be the next Steve Jobs. Please let me into your country, right? So people have different motivations, and that's okay. So this talk is for anybody with US hopes and dreams, aspirations, and goals. So if you want to not only live, but be free in the United States, your journey begins now. Okay, so so this is me. My name is Sophie Alcorn. Thank you, Daniel, for the lovely introduction. I am a board certified specialist attorney by the State Bar of California, Board of Legal Specialization. That basically means I've done thousands and thousands of immigration law cases in lots of very complicated areas, and I even got to help write the test for who else could become a certified specialist. My dad was an immigration lawyer. I have a European connection because my mom is from Germany, so ich kann auch ein bisschen Deutsch sprechen. And I write for TechCrunch. If you want to catch all of my updates, there's a podcast, Immigration Law for Startups, and then on Wednesdays, my TechCrunch column, Dear Sophie, gets published every week. Okay, so as we're about to dive into all of these ways to come to the United States, let's first, situate this in the right framework about startup immigration. And I do also want to say, we have an hour today, and I'm happy to answer questions. So any questions you have, you're welcome to drop those into the question panel now, or throughout the talk, and I'll answer them as they apply to whatever I'm talking about, and also I can reserve time at the end to talk about any of your specific questions. So I'm very happy to do that, so feel free to add those there. Okay, so startup immigration. So first of all, you are in good company if you want to grow a startup in the United States. Most unicorns have at least one international founder. Most highly valuable companies in the United States, including technology startups, have at least one immigrant, if not more, on their founding teams. This is, the case for Google. This is the case for Elon Musk was an immigrant from South Africa. So immigrants make it happen. So you are in good company. And you know, if you're interested in the Austrian programming that's available, I know you have to have a company registered in Austria, but you know, you might be an immigrant to Austria from another country already. So I will also touch on some options that might apply to you as well. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention is that usually most people from Austria can easily come to the United States for a quick educational program, a conference, business meetings, and most Austrian citizens typically do that with an online application for ESTA. Oops. ESTA is the way to be a visitor without getting a real visa. It's the electronic system for travel authorization. And you go to the ESTA website, you put in your information on a couple of web forms, and then it runs you through its databases. And if you get approved, which can sometimes, you know, it can take like a day or two to process, but once you're approved, that means you would have a 2-year authorization to visit the United States. You can come in and out anytime in those 2 years. And every time you show up, the maximum amount of time that they will let you into the country for is 90 days for any one single given trip. And you can either come as a business visitor to conduct business, or you can come as a tourist for pleasure, you know, to go to Disneyland, to do medical tourism. People come for all sorts of reasons. So I'll talk more about the reasons and how to navigate the timing in a minute. If you are living in Austria, but you're not an Austrian citizen, let's say you got the EU blue card and you're from India and you've been living in Austria and you have an Austrian company or something, but you're not an Austrian citizen, you would not qualify for ESTA. There's about 20 countries in the world that qualify for ESTA. So you would have to get a normal B1, B2 visitor visa. And you would go do that by scheduling an application. It would probably involve an appointment, and you would get typically a 10-year multiple entry visa in your passport. It's a little bit different from ESTA because every time you come in, you can stay for up to 6 months at a time, not 90 days. The categories are the same: business visitors and tourists. Now, some Austrian citizens have had issues getting ESTA approved because they have traveled to countries that the US is watching for terrorism reasons or other military and political reasons. So people who have been to Cuba, people who've been to Iran, Yemen, Somalia, there's various countries that are being watched. So based on this prior travel, that may be a grounds for your ESTA being denied. So if you've been to any of these countries that might be questionable and you're an Austrian citizen and you get into the Advantage Austria program and you want to come here, please act early to apply for a B1, B2 visitor visa so you have enough time to do the application, to schedule the appointment, to submit your passport, to get your passport back with the visa. You still have the possibility of coming to the United States after you pass the additional background checks and screening, but it's going to take longer. So don't apply for ESTA like 2 nights before you're trying to come here because it is not going, you know, it might not work. And that's really just a warning sign for any Austrians who have traveled to any countries that the US might find questionable. But even so, you know, if you're thinking of coming to the United States in September to participate in one of these amazing programs, you may want to just start your visitor process now, whether it's ESTA or the B1, B2, to have ample time to be able to come here, show up, and just have that peace of mind that you'll be able to make it into the United States for your visit. If you're coming to a program like Advantage Austria and you have, maybe you don't have, you have the other talk about like Delaware corporations and Delaware flips and all of that, it might, you may want to come into the United States as a business visitor. You are not allowed to be employed in the United States. You can't earn money in the United States. You can't get a paycheck here. You can't work here. You can't hold yourself out as working for a US company. But you are allowed to attend conferences, workshops, do research, meet with potential customers, talk to VCs, present at a demo day, visit different startup workspaces, rent office space for your future company, incorporate for your future company. All of those things are allowed. But for people who, come in as a business visitor and say, I'm the CEO of a US company, they could be denied entry because that could cross the boundary and be determined to be employment in the United States. So you want to be very cautious. On the other hand, sometimes people are like, well, can I just come in as a tourist, please? And then they participate in a startup program. And the issue there is, once I had a consultation with somebody who had been from a Western European country, they, looked American or whatever that could mean. And they came here as a tourist, and then they rented a WeWork for their company. And then 4 years later, they told me that they had applied for an E2 investor visa after putting $200,000 of their own money into their US company. And they ended up having their investor visa, and I'll talk more about investor visas later, but they ended up having their investor visa denied at the consulate, which was very strict because the government officer accused them of committing fraud when they said they were coming in for tourism purposes, but they rented their WeWork on that trip. So I just want you to be very, very cautious. Everything you say is recorded. They will access all your social media handles. They will check your LinkedIn position. So you want to be very conservative in visiting the United States to make it very clear that you are not working here and you are following these visitor immigration rules. Now, once you get to the United States on ESTA, you have to leave before the 90 days. There are no extensions. The only thing sometimes is that if somebody falls in love with a US citizen and gets married, they could stay and get a green card, but do not come here with that intention. That is a reason for you to be denied entry. For people who come on B1, B2, it is possible to change status after arrival. However, you do need to come in with non-immigrant intent, the intent to not live here permanently on any of these statuses. So that is visiting the United States to be in a startup program. Okay, so as we move forward, there's kind of like two stages of startups, right? There's the 0 to 1 phase where you're building your MVP and you're trying to get product market fit. That's captured in Peter Thiel's book. And then there's the scaling stage where you have product market fit and you're trying to keep up with growth as you scale from 1 to infinity. And that's captured in Reid Hoffman's book about blitz scaling. So my legal practice helps founders with both this early 0 to 1 phase immigration as well as scaling immigration. For 0 to 1, we're more likely to need to focus on founders, managing director in North America, initial sales into the US market, roles of that nature. For this scaling version, we're more likely to focus on work visas like H-1Bs for engineers and product managers, analysts, and other type of people who might be employees at a scaling company. So we can certainly help you with that type of immigration, but today we're gonna be focusing on 0 to 1 founder immigration for super early stage companies. But if you are at a later stage, we do have solutions for you for scaling and employees. So we're certainly happy to have additional conversations about that as well. Okay, so here we are in the mist, in the fog, in the clouds, in the forest, wondering where we are and how to get out. So let's talk about demystifying qualifications. There are several key visas and green cards that I want to focus on today. Primarily, most founders really end up liking the O1A visa, the EB1A green card, and the EB2 NIW green card. We're going to talk about a few bonus visas as well for the short term. But most of our clients at this 0 to 1 phase tend to go for one of these options. So before we dive into what these look like, just a word about, in general, what US work visas look like and how they're different from green cards. So If you want to live in the United States permanently for the rest of your life and have the opportunity to become a US citizen, you need a green card. That is permanent residence. You don't have to be in the US to apply for a green card. You could actually stay in Austria while you do it. It takes longer though. It takes about 2 years, 1 to 3 years to get permission to be a permanent resident. On the other hand, if you want to move here in the next 3 to 6 or 9 months and be able to start working immediately, that's what you would need a work visa for. They are usually issued in 2 to 3 year increments, depending on what type of category you're applying for. Sometimes there's a maximum number of times that you can extend them for. So most of our clients who need to come to the US like yesterday, they tend to get a work visa first, and then later after they're settled in, they end up getting green cards. Some work visas allow your spouse to also work, some don't. So if you're married, pay attention to that. If you have kids, they can be your dependents until they turn 21 years old. So it's good for your whole family to get green cards before any kids turn 21, so that they can stay here longer if they want. And you can also do like extensions or changes on work visas in the US after you arrive as well. And some of them can switch to another company if you really like it here, but you don't have a green card yet and something happens with your startup, you may be able to switch to another company as well if you want to keep working here. Okay, so there are actually 3 types of short-term work visas I want to talk about here. They are the L1 visa, the E2 visa, and the O1 visa. And so these are visas for working in the United States for an initial period of 1 to 3 years to be able to set up and launch operations at your company and to potentially start the green card process if you want. So let's first talk about the L1 visa, because a lot of you probably already have companies created in Austria, and you're probably already working there. So this might be a wonderful way to bring managers, executives, or employees with specialized knowledge to the United States. So this is also great in my other example of the Indian citizen with a blue card visa in Europe, who's like a co-founder of an Austrian company, who is not an Austrian citizen. You know, this is valuable for citizens of any countries. So basically, this L1 visa is for people who are transferring from, let's just say, an Austrian branch of a company to the United States. There are 2 types. There is the L1 category for managers and executives, and there is the L1B category for people with specialized knowledge. So to qualify, you must have spent at least 1 year working as an employee on the payroll of the company out of the last 3 years for any branch of the company in the world. So let's say you have an Austrian corporation, you're a founder, you have been working there for at least a year. Sometimes we've been able to help founders who have been working there even though they're not on payroll, or different countries. Sometimes like the managing directors aren't allowed to be paid as employees, or there's different specific rules. So there's different ways we have to prove you've been working there. But if, let's say there's an Austrian company, you've been working there for at least 1 year, and now you want to start a Delaware parent company and do a Delaware flip, and you want to bring the CEO and the top salesperson to New York to access the US market, conduct user interviews, and try to scale in the United States while you raise funding. The L1 could totally work. The CEO might go for that manager or executive L1A, the lead sales engineer person who has not been managing people, but who has really detailed knowledge of the product and the sales process. They might qualify for an L1B for specialized knowledge. If your company in the US is less than 1 year old, you can get this visa for a year to come here, and then you can extend it in total for up to 7 years. And if your company has already been doing business in the United States, then your initial visas don't have to be limited to 1 year. They could be potentially available for 3 years. This is a great visa because your spouse, if you're married, can work. And it also has an advantage of being for immigrant intent. So if you intend to live here permanently and get a green card, that is perfectly okay from the very beginning. Some of our companies have offices in Spain and Turkey and Singapore, and they're moving a lot of people to the United States. So after a certain point, if your company is doing enough volume of business, it's possible to get even a blanket L1 to make it very easy for any employee who's been working for a year at any of the branches to come to the United States. We have to show common ownership between the Austrian company and the US company. So there could be a parent-subsidiary relationship in either direction. They could have the same set of owners, but we really want to establish that the US company has the same management and control as the foreign entity where you were recently working. So that is the L1. Another option, and this is more rare, but some of you Austrians may already be in the United States, or maybe you already got an H-1B visa at some point to work for a US company as like an engineer. It is possible for founders to transfer H-1Bs to their startup. We typically do that for CTOs, but it can also happen for CEOs. This visa is a little more complicated because you're not allowed to be self-employed. So we just have to make a really strong legal case that even though you're a founder, you're still a legitimate employee of the US company. There's also a minimum wage, prevailing wage requirement for an H-1B that the other visas do not have. So you can see all of these visa categories were constructed differently. They all have different goals and purposes, and they all have different requirements. It is the H-1B lottery season right now. So if you already have an existing US company, like you incorporated on Stripe Atlas, you have a Delaware C Corporation, you have your SS4 employer identification number from the IRS, and you have a US bank account with some money in it. Now is the annual chance to put new people into this H-1B lottery that happens once a year at the end of every March. So your US company could put in, however many people you want, 10 Austrian friends who you would like to sponsor in the United States, or your whole co-founding team. It's just a professional work visa. It doesn't matter if you were employed abroad, or you're investing any money, or you're super special. It's sort of like for professionals with bachelor's degrees, once a year, there's a lottery. So now the lottery is happening. Now you have a chance. So if you want your US startup to sponsor anybody, please contact us today. And tomorrow we might not have space to take on new clients. But if that's interesting for you, if you're already at the stage of we've set up in the US and we know which employees we would like to bring, having the H-1B is a really wonderful thing. It's just hard to get with this lottery, but the time is now. Okay, so another wonderful visa that is available for Austrian citizens. There's actually two. They're called the E-visas. The E1 is for people conducting trade, primarily between Austria and the United States, and you have to show like a couple years of a lot of contracts or transactions between the two countries. The other option that's more common for global startups would be the E2 for investment and employees. So I keep bringing up the Indian citizen. So this is a situation in which to get this visa, you must share the citizenship of your company's owners to qualify. And Austria has a qualifying treaty with the US, but India does not. So the way this would work, in several examples. Typically, okay, let me stop here. So the E2 is an investor visa. Sometimes, like before the startup thing got big, people would be like, oh, I want to own a yogurt franchise in the United States to get a visa for myself and my family. So I'm going to invest $200,000 setting up a frozen yogurt shop in Los Angeles with a franchise so that my family and I can come and we'll hire some Americans to run the frozen yogurt store. So a lot of people have used this visa in that way, but we use it for startups. And some of our startups, they've done it in different ways. Sometimes you would have an Austrian corporation that would open up a wholly owned subsidiary in the United States and put in $100,000 or $200,000 of cash to open up a US office and hire Americans. If you do that, the company can hire any person who is a citizen of Austria who has skills that are essential to the business. It doesn't matter if they've ever worked for the company before in Austria or the US. It doesn't matter if the person is, a student in the US or they're still in Austria. Anybody who's an Austrian citizen whose skills are essential to the business can qualify, including the CEO. Also, sometimes the founder has, put in their own IP and they're executing the Delaware flip. And so this visa is great. One of my clients, but it has limits. One of my clients from Europe recently raised a $40 million Series B round after having done business in the United States for 4 or 5 years. So because so originally the US company was majority owned by people who were citizens of that CEO's home country. But now that they've raised so many rounds and the ownership is diluting, and at this point the CEO probably has 10% or something, so at this point, the number of Austrian angel investors and the number of angels and shareholders from this founder's home country is decreasing. And as soon as it goes below 51% ownership from people of that country, then this E2 would no longer become available. So it can work for early stage companies, it can work for lifestyle businesses, but if the Austrian ownership would decrease below 50%, then it's really important to make sure that everybody has green cards or other types of visas that they can qualify for. I would say that of the visas we've talked about so far, this is the slowest to get. The processing would be totally done by the US consulate in Austria, and there is no way to pay and speed it up. So these can often take 6 to 12 months. So it might make sense if you're in the United States already as like a student and you want to change your status, but there might be faster ways to get here if you're physically in Austria and you want to work in the United States. So speaking of which, the fastest working visa from abroad for somebody who qualifies, I think, is an O1. There is no lottery. There is no requirement of having worked at the company in the past. There is no requirement of any sort of investment or funding. There's no minimum wage. This is a category for people who have extraordinary ability. And so some of our clients are already able to leverage their past entrepreneurial or research experience from their business or academic careers to already qualify for this, even if it's in their first startup. Others, are serial founders and they've had multiple startups and exits, and so we can use that as well. Some founders are definitely, at the beginning. If you've been a student or you've always worked in a company for somebody else and your accomplishments haven't gotten that much notoriety yet, you might be at the beginning, and that is okay too. We will talk about what the requirements are and how to get them. And I will say that the Biden-Harris presidential administration in the US made it earlier last year for people to qualify in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, or math. So a lot of startup founders, CEOs, CTOs, many startup founders can qualify for this. So in order to qualify, you need 3 out of 8 qualifications that we have to demonstrate that you meet. They include awards that are professional awards, not student awards, membership in groups that are hard to get into, media coverage of your work, your inventions, interviews of you, articles about your product or your startup, judging if you've been the judge of a hackathon or pitch competition or other types of professional competitions, not student competitions. Creating something of original business significance. What you created matters. So disruptive technology would certainly matter. Scaling somebody else's idea would not necessarily matter. But remember, we only need 3 of 8, right? So another category is authorship. If you're from an academic background, then being first or second or third author of academic publications, but you could also write for Forbes Council or Business Insider or an Austrian startup journal, for example. Those types of articles, usually 5 to 10. Leadership, so critical roles in distinguished organizations, that can help. That can be being the CEO or other founder of a startup. Variety of roles can qualify, and your compensation. It can either be that before you were a startup founder, you were in the 95th percentile of wages for McKinsey consultants in Austria, or it could be that, you know, based on your latest funding round, you were at a $20 million valuation and you have 50% of the company. So theoretically, your shares are worth $10 million. So there's a lot of ways that we can establish this evidence. And it really depends on you and your individual experience. But it's totally possible. And another really beneficial thing for people who end up getting an O1 is we can structure it in such a way that it's actually sponsored by an agent, not one particular company. And the benefit of that for entrepreneurial self-starters is that you can set it up so you can work for multiple companies. So this comes from Hollywood because a lot of movie stars get O1 visas. And so we've set it up for founders before, where they're the founder of their company, they get advisory shares and they serve as an advisor in their friends' companies. Maybe they're going to be paid to be a speaker as an independent contractor at a conference. Maybe they have to do independent consulting work on the side for a few hours every week to pay the bills while they're building their MVP. But most of the US work visas, you have to focus on one job that will pay you, and that's the only place you're allowed to work at until you get a green card. But this is a really nice thing about the O1, is that for, you know, brilliant, talented people who want to do everything, there is a way to set it up legally. All right, and I see the questions starting to come in, so I will answer those throughout. So thank you so much, and feel free to add more questions. So I guess to recap, before we move on, I would just say the O1 is great for Austrian founders. If you already qualify, you could probably get an O1 to just move here and start working before the batch program starts in September. And then you would be allowed to get paid in the US during that time. You can put yourself on LinkedIn as being the CEO of the company. You can just like stay in the United States for 3 years, and you can have the Austrian program be the kickoff of your new life, essentially, if you wanted to. And these credentials, the O1 is nicknamed the Einstein visa, but you do not have to be Albert Einstein. Many normal people get it all the time. We just have to show 3 of these 8. Sometimes we like to show 4. We do need a lot of paper though. These applications are often like 400 physical sheets of paper that we mail to the government. They're still paper-based and old school. And this is a very lovely starting point to qualify for a green card as well. And we'll start talking about that. Oh, and we have a question on this. The question is, can my own company be the sponsoring company with an O1? Yes, absolutely. So the typical foundational assumption is that all work visas are sponsored by companies. The O1 with an agent is the exception. So normally companies sponsor all of these work visas. So thank you for that. Okay. So now also some of the questions about green cards. So let's talk about green cards. There are probably like 30 green card categories to the United States. A green card is permanent residence. You can get it through an annual lottery. I think Austrian citizens usually qualify for that. You can get it by marrying an American. There's a TV show called 90 Day Fiancé about that. But for our purposes today, we're going to be focusing on the primary green cards for startup founders. And some of the visas we mentioned have a direct path, and some do not. And it doesn't matter if you ever had a work visa to qualify for a green card. So some of my clients are in this situation. They're in their 40s, they have teenagers, and they don't want to disrupt their kids and their schools and their friends and all of that for like 1 year in the United States, but they would want to move here if they knew that they had green cards and the kids could just go to college here. So if you're okay with staying in Austria for the next 2 to 3 years and you qualify for a green card, you could sponsor yourself now in certain categories, even without an employer to sponsor you. But that being said, with a lot of my startup founder clients, it's important and urgent to be in the United States as soon as possible. So many people in that situation just want to get here first on like an O1 or an L1 or an E2 or some other thing, or they're here as an international student, and then once they're here and in that status and they get comfortable, then they're ready to start the green card process, which is a little bit faster to get a green card in the US than in Austria, because there's still slowdowns at the consulates from COVID. So keep that in mind too. If you're in the US on a work visa, then you could potentially get a green card here in like 1.5 to 2.5 years instead of 2 to 3 years from abroad. So the point is that green cards are independent of visas, although some of them do share a couple of commonalities. And before I dive into the most common green cards for founders, somebody did ask about the L1 visa, which is the visa for intercompany transferees. So people who worked for 1 out of the last 3 years for the company abroad, and now they're working in the United States and need to grow the company here. They asked, with having the L1 visa already and being in the US, how long does it typically take to get a green card? And the L1 is kind of special in that there is a particular green card category that's pretty similar. It's called an EB1C, C as in Charlie, green card for multinational managers and executives. And that requires that your company in the US has been doing business for at least 1 year, which is an additional requirement beyond the L1. But that is typically the 1.5 to 2.5 year process that I mentioned for being inside the United States. It's kind of a similar time frame for all of these categories of green cards. And so to get that EB1C multinational manager green card, you would need your company to sponsor you. But I'm going to be chatting about the green cards now that you can get without a company, so independent of your employer, in parallel with your employer. And so the first big one is the EB1A. And so EB1 stands for employment-based first preference. So the people that the US wants here the most, the first preference of employment-based green cards is people with extraordinary ability. So that is like the O1A extraordinary ability visa, but it is held to a higher standard. So if it's harder to get, well, okay, and then there's another one that most Austrians would end up going for, which is the EB2 national interest waiver, which is different and easier. So why would you go for an EB1? Well, if you're born in India or China, there could be decades-long wait times for you to get your turn in line to get a US green card. So the shortest fastest category is an EB1A for extraordinary ability. So a lot of our clients from those countries end up working extra beyond the O1 to qualify for the EB1A. However, if you have the good fortune of being born on Austrian or European soil or other countries with low levels of immigration to the United States, you can get a green card through the easier category of second preference, employment-based green cards. NIW stands for National Interest Waiver. This takes pretty much the same amount of time overall as the EB1, plus it's easier to get. So a lot of our startup founder clients from Europe end up self-petitioning EB2 National Interest Waiver green cards after they arrive here on an O1. And even people who are on an L1 who work for companies, but maybe they're not the owner, they may want to self-petition for this green card as well, in addition to their company-sponsored EB1C, and just see which green card ends up getting approved more quickly. So if you're an Austrian citizen and you want to go for this green card, it's easier than an O1 for extraordinary ability. You have to show that you either have an advanced degree, like a master's degree, so an MBA would work, Master's of Engineering, PhD, all of those would qualify. It doesn't matter if you went to school in the United States or another country. Or we've gotten the EB2 NIW for people who never even went to college by showing that they have exceptional ability, which is very similar to those 801 categories, but easier. You don't need as much evidence, like having a bachelor's degree in engineering could help, or being in a professional society for engineers in your country could work. It's much easier. So in order to qualify for this, we have to show what you're going to be doing in the United States, and we have to explain why this has substantial merit and why it is of national importance to the United States. And we have to show specifically that you, of all people, are really good to be doing this particular job in the United States as opposed to another person. Because this waiver portion is basically saying that the US normally has this requirement to make sure that you're not displacing any able, willing, and qualified US workers who want the job instead. So we're basically making an argument that what you are particularly positioned to do is so critical to the United States that we really shouldn't replace you with any random American, which makes sense if you are a startup founder. So that is the EB2 NIW. And I mentioned a little bit about like going to school in the United States and if it does or doesn't matter. And somebody asked the question, does graduating from an American university with a master's degree make it easier to receive a working visa? The answer is, if you want an H-1B visa to work in the United States as an employee for a company, such as a startup or a big corporation, and you need to go through that H-1B lottery, yes, it does make a difference if you have a US master's degree. This is for that H-1B lottery that's happening right now. So if your company wants to sponsor potential employees from any country to move to the United States to do jobs that require a bachelor's level of education, there's actually a boost in the lottery selection process if you have a master's degree or a PhD from a United States college or university. So those people with US master's degrees do have increased odds of being selected in the H-1B lottery. For everything else in immigration, though, there's no boost, there's no effect of having an American master's degree. So that's the place where it matters. So if somebody needs an H-1B through the lottery, yes, the American master's degree makes it easier. Okay, so we have about a few more minutes and only a couple more slides. So if you have any more questions, now is the time to definitely add those to the questions panel. And I should be able to answer any remaining questions. So do put them in now, please. So, you know, a lot of people as they're going through this are wondering, do I already qualify? Do I need more evidence? What do I need to do? When can I start this? So just a quick note about my law firm and how we support founders. We're happy to guide you. Whatever you put in the question panel is obviously, not confidential because of the forum we're in today. Oftentimes founders need some individualized guidance. So we're happy to offer consultations. I will be sharing our contact information in just a moment, but our URL is alcorn.law, and you can contact us through our website. We do have an offering specifically for people who are not yet sure if they qualify for an O1A, an EB1A, or an EB2 NIW green card. It's called Legal Launch, and that's where we'll really dive into your background and give you a lot of clarity on how much you already qualify, answer all your questions, help guide you in what you need to do to prepare if you aren't yet qualified for one of those extraordinary ability or national interest options. And I do really think it helps people who specifically need that with increased odds of approval. We'll help you, confirm your eligibility. And really, when we work with any company or any founder to navigate one of these US visa or green card processes, we're providing guidance and project management to prepare all of the documents, and we're available via Zoom, and we'll help make sure that all of your evidence qualifies so that you have the highest chance of approval right off the bat. And specifically with our Legal Launch program, it does definitely increase people's odds of getting their visas and green cards approved. So if you're thinking about the Austrian program I think there's several cities, San Francisco, and I believe maybe Austin and New York. So here's a little pun for you, an adventure I'll pack on my bags. So the US is definitely possible. There are a lot of ways to get here. There's a lot of ways to come for a short trip, a medium trip, or a lifetime. It's all possible. Here's our contact information. There's a QR code that's available for you, but probably, fastest is emailing us or simply calling us, hello@alcorn.law, and we're very happy to chat with you. And in the remaining time, thank you for the questions. I will go ahead and answer them for you. Okay, so somebody asks, does it make a difference between the individual states, or is it basically always the same procedure? For example, California and Florida. Oh, that's a wonderful question. Immigration is federal law at the country level, so it is the same process and the same agencies and the same evidence whether you plan to live in San Francisco, California, Los Angeles, California, Austin, Texas, Miami, Florida, Manhattan in New York. It's all the same. And if you even want to work from home, we can set up visas to do that. If you want to have multiple work locations, we can set up visas to do that. But once you're in the United States, the immigration people want to know where you're living and where you're working, but you can have the same access essentially to any US state you want to go to. Great question. Somebody asked, if I want to found a startup in the US, can I do that, and can I sponsor myself? How big must the startup be or the investment be that is secured to do that? And then they go on, or is it better if the company is founded in Austria and we just have a branch in the United States? This is something that really depends. I would suggest that you contact us at hello@alcorn.law, say that you attended the GoUSA startup talk for Austrian entrepreneurs, and can you please fill out our Alcorn questionnaire, which will inventory your eligibility for every type of visa that we talked about and more. And it really depends. If you already qualify for one of these visas, like an O1, you have some preliminary funding, and you absolutely know that you have to be in the United States, we're happy. I mean, many of our clients do it that way. If it's important to achieve certain milestones for investors in Austria before moving to the United States, or if you need to prepare things with your family, we can also do a longer term plan. But certainly we have helped startup founders with like a US company and $10,000 in the bank and some past qualifications, get O1s to come here to be the CEO to start their company in the US for the first time. So the US company doesn't have to be big. There might be, very little nominal investment. Oops. And there we go. And we're certainly very flexible for who we can help. Let's see. Okay. Well, I just pushed a button and my question window went away. There may have been one more. I'm so sorry, but I don't see it right now. So I think with that, it's a good place to potentially stop, unless Daniel, you can see what the other question was.
Sophie, it feels like you opened a whole bottle full of questions. They are coming in and more in depth. But as you mentioned before, and you're sharing your contact details, I'm sure it's okay if the founders reach out to you or we collect the questions and try to answer them together and give them a decent feedback. At this point, thank you so much. It's a perfect spot landing. We have 1 minute left, so I can go back and also share a little bit about the program that you have referred to already in your presentation. Thank you for doing that as well. So we run our own accelerator program that has been around for 15 years. It's the Go Silicon Valley and now the GoUSA program. It's a 4-week program for Austrian, mostly early stage startups with a little bit of traction already in Austria or the DACH region, and who are entering or interested to enter the US market. We built the program in 3 locations. It's in San Francisco, in Austin, and in Boston this year. Last year, we did a program in New York as well. And the focus areas for this year we've chosen in Boston is digital health and medtech. In Austin, it's going to be everything around sustainability and impact technology. And in San Francisco, of course, we have a tech and software focus, and especially interesting region if you come here and are looking to raise money in the long term. And I think with everything we've heard today from Sophie, there shouldn't be any trouble in actually participating in our programs and entering the US and spending a good time here and setting you up for success. One last slide. So you have our contact details. Natasha, my colleague here in San Francisco, she is the organizer and in charge of the San Francisco program. I'll be dealing with the Austin program, and our colleague Victoria Lidl in the New York office is in charge and organizing the Boston program. So if you have any questions about the programs, feel free to always reach out to us. And with that, thank you so much for being part of our 3rd episode. Thank you so much, Sophie, for this incredible presentation. And I hope to see you all at our next GoUSA Startup Talk.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Bye, everybody.